With that, we've come to our next segment of the day on the theme Cloud for a Sustainable Future and Innovation with Convergence of Cloud with Emerging Tech. So friends, please grab your coffee or tea and sit back to enjoy our next set of discussions. We will begin the series with our first session on how Web 3.0 with cloud is revolutionizing the world. Understand from an expert with use cases on how Web 3.0 with cloud revolutionizes businesses and alters consumer journeys across sectors and industries, and how it will transform the digital economy. Our speaker this evening is Dr. Praphul Chandra, founder and CEO of KoineArth. Praphul is a scholar with a remarkable understanding of blockchain technology, artificial intelligence, and machine learning. He established KoineArth, a startup working at the intersection of blockchains, machine learning, and mechanism design. It's a pleasure to have you join us this evening. Over to you, Praphul.
Thank you, Justin. Good morning, everyone. My name is Praphul, and I'm here to talk to you about digital passports, which connect IoT, cloud, and Web3 in a very nice way. And some of the work that we have done on KoineArth is based on digital passports, right? So let me jump in. The key summary slide is this one. This is my first slide, and this will also be my last slide. I think the key insight to take away from what I'm going to talk about today is how edge computing and cloud are critical enablers of Web 3.0. If we reflect back over the last decade or so, the idea of digital twins has been well established. Let's take a minute to think about what digital twins are. The idea is pretty simple. You start with data about a physical asset, which is collected using IoT sensors. There is your edge. This is typically streamed back after some pre-processing on the edge back to the enterprise cloud. This data is typically owned, maintained, and controlled by an enterprise. And therefore, later on, the enterprise uses it either for simulation or monitoring the physical device or for maintaining it in some way. This idea, as I said, has been well established with IoT and edge computing for some time now. What I'm talking about today is the next step in the journey of digital twins, which we call product passports. Now, there are some ways that the product passports are similar to digital twins and some ways that they are different. So first, let's look at the similarity. Just like digital twins, the passports are based on data collected from a physical asset using edge computing or IoT sensors. The key difference is that this data, instead of being stored on a single enterprise's cloud, is stored on a distributed or a private shared ledger between multiple entities. And that is the key moment where blockchain technology starts to come in, because this data is no longer owned, maintained, or controlled by one enterprise, but it is done so by a bunch of business enterprises coming together or business partners coming together. Now, there is a value proposition in this. Let me give you some example. In today's complex supply chains, as the data moves across multiple enterprises, it tends to lose value. One example of this is if you have to do ESG compliance or tracking of a particular product, which has been built by multiple partners, how do you ensure that all the data across enterprise boundaries about that product is shared on a single available platform, which is accessible to all the enterprises? So ESG compliance data is a great example of what can be stored on the product passport. In the next few slides, I'm going to talk to you about some other examples. For example, if you are building a financial services or a risk model based on a data from multiple enterprises, then such financial services models require a shared ledger. Before I move to the examples to make this real for you, let me also talk about where we see this going. The next stage in the journey of product passports are what we call digital assets, right? Again, some similarities as before. Data is still collected from a physical asset. It is collected using IoT sensors and edge computing. But this time, instead of being stored on a private shared ledger, it is stored on a public shared ledger. This is what we call a public blockchain. And this data is owned, maintained, and controlled, not by nodes set up by different enterprises in the cloud, but by public blockchain nodes. Now, why would you want to do this? Why would you want the data about a physical asset to be publicly viewable? Well, if you think about what this data is used for, in things like ownership. So if you want to record that this particular physical product was sold from one person to another person, that is what about who owns this particular asset at any point of time, which should be public knowledge in many cases, then the ownership information is a good example of how a product passport translates into a digital asset when we change the private blockchain to a public blockchain. Once you start recording ownership of assets on the public blockchain, you just open up the whole model of trading assets on a public blockchain across the world, across digital boundaries, across geographical boundaries. And that's the excitement in the financial assets worlds with digital assets. So if you take a step back and now look at this slide from left to right, you see a very natural evolution of IoT data, edge computing data, first being stored on a single enterprise cloud, then being stored still on the cloud, but across multiple enterprise boundaries. And third, yes, it is still kind of in the cloud, but we call it a public blockchain because the nodes are still in the cloud, but the nodes are not really maintained, controlled by any single entity. And that really is the transition that is the key takeaway of this slide. And this slide will repeat in the end because that is also the key takeaway. I will use the next 8 to 10 minutes to give you some examples of how this is being done in the industry, right? So I represent KoineArth, and our markets and platform is exactly suited for building such product passports and in future digital assets. What we do is we enable enterprises to create business groups, right? Business groups is a collection of enterprises working together in a supply chain, for example. And these business groups underneath the hood are private blockchains, and they begin to act at the application layer as digital ecosystems where enterprises can collaborate with each other. Product passports are representations of physical assets on these digital ecosystems, and they are used for secure auditable data sharing because the data recorded in the passport is A, digitally signed, B, time-stamped, and 3, cannot be deleted or modified. And that really is the value proposition of a product passport. Let me give you an example. One example I will talk about is our car passport solution, which is currently in production with MG Motor India. And the idea is to take the data about the vehicle, which generates humongous amounts of data today using connected car technology, and take this data and store it in a distributed ledger or in a business group across boundaries of MG Motors, ICICI Insurance, Reliance Insurance, and Bajaj Insurance, right? So all these parties are able to read and write data about the vehicle to enable things like usage-based insurance and calculating the real-time value of the car based on how it was driven. The benefits to the end customers are lower insurance premium and higher resale value. Let me be very clear, we still respect data privacy, and whether or not a car's data is shared between MG Motors and ICICI Insurance is completely under the control of the car owner or the car driver. So you'll see an example. This is a product passport, which is an extension of the digital twin idea. But now, since multiple entities are reading and writing data about the vehicle onto the passport, new use cases like usage-based insurance and higher resale value are getting enabled. Let me give you, so these are more details about the vehicle digital passport. Fundamentally, what we are talking about is a model where multiple entities can share data about the product with each other in a supply chain. In this case, it's a downstream supply chain from the vehicle manufacturer to insurance companies. And everything that is recorded on the passport is digitally signed, time-stamped, and creates a history of the vehicle from cradle to grave. Another example that we are working on right now is what we call the material passport. This is with Hindalco, and this allows the passport to be created where the physical asset are the aluminum rolls, right? And the data that is collected in the passport is about, as this aluminum roll moves through a contract manufacturing supply chain, how much of it is consumed by which contract manufacturer, which products are built out of it, how much of it is scrapped, so that you are able to do end-to-end tracking of this aluminum roll to avoid wastage in the supply chain. Yet another example of this is our customer in Korea called MVL, Motor Vehicle Ledger. In this case, it's an interesting use case because even though the data is coming from a vehicle, from a cab, what is happening underneath the hood is that this data is being actually attributed to the driver. so as to create a driver history, how many rides he or she took, what is there for his or her earning potential. Now, this information, as you can imagine, can be very useful to banks. So the drivers can take this information to the banks and present a verifiable history of their earning potential, which in this case becomes useful for taking uncollateralized loans from banks. So that is another example, right? Now, there are some benefits that we have built in our solution to explicitly support product passports. We enable brands and enterprises to create secure private groups using private blockchain technology. And you can create digital passports, which enable different partners to read and write product data into the passport. We have web and mobile UI. There's an API integration, which is available for apps. And the APIs are pretty standard for partners to push and pull data. So the platform is available as a ready-to-use SaaS. Right? Let me summarize what I have been talking about. What we have been talking about is the ability of edge computing and cloud to become enablers of Web 3.0. Digital twins as a technology has existed for a while. What is new now is the ability of this data to be shared across enterprise boundaries using a technology like blockchain. And this blockchain, in a private blockchain, sits on the cloud but spans enterprise boundaries and enables use cases like usage-based insurance or uncollateralized loans or ESG compliance or tracking usage of material in the supply chain. Where we see this going in the future is once these assets are put on a public blockchain, then these assets can be traded and owned publicly, which opens up more use cases. Thank you. I'll stop here. And if there are any questions, happy to take them. Back to you, Justin.
Beg your pardon. I was on mute. Once again, thank you, Praphul, for an informative presentation there.